I'll stop screen share for right now, right?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. It is Tiana Wolford, the CEO of the Sickle Cell Reproductive Health Education Directive, or SCRED for short. And this is our second roundtable. We thank you. We had an amazing turnout for our Like Fine Wine roundtable, and this one is specifically on trauma and depression and anxiety in sickle cell disease. So, being the first and only sickle cell organization to have a mission around sexual, maternal, and reproductive health, I think a lot of people are probably wondering why we're hosting a mental health roundtable. So one of the things that we did last year, we hosted these fireside chats for men, women, and caregivers. And I think it was really lost upon me just how reproductive health can impact your mental health. But a lot of times when we would do those fireside chats, we couldn't even get into reproductive health because people just needed to vent. And we had a lot of people admitting to anxiety and depression. And so it just felt like SCRED needed to be more involved in mental health. And we have some partnerships coming up that I will announce after this roundtable, but I don't want to take away any more time. We are in for a really good treat. We have an amazing presentation by Dr. Charles Jonassaint, who is a familiar face, clinical psychologist, and amazing STD advocate, and also a personal friend. And yes, we did rehearse that intro together. So after he presents, we'll take questions and answers, and then we are going to have a panel discussion. So Dr. Jonassaint, are you ready?
Absolutely. I am absolutely excited to be here, particularly talking about this topic. And I'm glad that we're bringing a little bit more awareness to mental health and sickle cell. Because for many years, I've been working in sickle cell for 20 years now. I know I look young, but I've been doing this for a really long time. I'm a doctor. I have a doctorate in psychology. I'm also an epidemiologist, and all my research really focuses around how can we improve mental health and coping with stress among adults and adolescents living with sickle cell. And right today, I'd really like us to talk about how we can. First, I want to talk about what mental health looks like in sickle cell. Interesting, Tiana, that you brought up PTSD symptoms and trauma. I will not be talking about that today. I'm going to have to come back and we're going to have to do a whole session on trauma specifically because that's a very, very relevant topic right now. And a lot of warriors that I've spoken to not only have symptoms that are very similar to PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, but I think across the board, all of us can talk about an experience of trauma and what the repercussions of that experience are. I don't think that we recognize or we address it nearly enough. But first of all, not to jump away, speaking about trauma, the experience in a hospital or an emergency department can't be described as anything else but a traumatic experience. And I think we don't give it the attention that it really deserves about what it's like to have a prolonged hospital stay or even just an acute stay, an acute experience in the hospital setting. Because not only are you going there at a time when you are the most vulnerable, in a time where you do have significant need, but oftentimes there's going to be that experience of discrimination and being marginalized and being treated as less than human. And for a lot of warriors that I've spoken to, it's not only this experience of discrimination, but the feeling of being out of control and not having a handle on life. And as this warrior said, this pain, the sickle cell is not giving me a chance to do nothing else but in this hospital bed. And that's it's a really difficult place to be in, because what we find to be the most stressful, the hardest thing to deal with, is stress that is unpredictable and uncontrollable. If you can predict when a pain crisis is coming, if you could predict when you're going to be hospitalized, that's one thing. And if you could control it, that would be even better. But to have both the unpredictability and the feeling of not being able to control it, that's the part that we feel like is a significant risk factor for our warriors. So this is one of the quotes that we got off of Facebook. We scanned several sickle cell groups on Facebook and found a lot of mentions of mental health. I mean, this was several years ago. This was about 5 years ago that we pulled this. And this quote says, "I'm really giving up on life. I don't have no support nor help that I need. The sickle cell can take over now. I want to go to heaven and not have to suffer for no more." And if anybody's seen me present on this before, I think the fact is that not that this person is describing their experience of suffering and wanting to end life, but the fact that they're sharing it for the whole world to see. Like, this is on Facebook, right? So when we get into the point where we're suffering so much and we're asking for help, and the place that we decide to ask for help is worldwide, and that's the last place that you're going, you know you're in really dire straits. So I'd like to at least leave you, if you don't remember anything else from this presentation or this discussion that we have, is that it's important for no one to feel like they're alone. At the end of the day, no one should feel like they're alone. So regardless of who it is, how difficult it might be to be around that person, whatever it is, let's just make sure that nobody feels alone. Because there's oftentimes there's somebody suffering. It might be somebody that we just passed by on the street, or somebody we, just silenced their phone call, but they might be going through some things and we don't even know it. All right. So suicidal ideation is when you are in pain. Is this relevant in SCD? So one thing we found out in a recent study is that so many individuals are talking about suicidality, not in the way of, oh my goodness, I'm going to kill myself right now, but the feeling of things are so bad in terms of this pain, it would be better off if I were dead. And now when we probe a little bit further, of course, nobody's saying, oh, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to end it all right now. Of course, everybody says, you know what, I can continue on. But just that feeling of, over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by thoughts that you'd be better off dead or of hurting yourself in some way? And I feel like anybody on this call can admit to feeling like this at some point in time, but is this happening more frequently with our warriors, and particularly during times when your pain is out of control or life period is completely out of control? And the truth is that if we don't ask about it, we don't know. And too often we don't ask about it. Study we just recently did, 182 patients responded to this question, or now we have 360 patients that have responded to this question, and I'll update the stat at some point, but 41 said several days or more. So that's 22% said, I have thoughts that I'd be better off dead or hurting myself in some way, right? So that's 1 out of 5. So just think about this, that if we don't ask about it, it's happening and we don't know. And so just make sure that nobody is alone. Nobody ever feels alone. And so we see this cycle oftentimes, exactly what this is. You have that stressful event, whether it's an argument with a loved one, whether it's an argument with your medical provider, maybe having to drop out of school, maybe being hospitalized frequently, having a pulmonary embolism and feeling at risk that, this might be the end. Losing a baby, whatever that stressor is, that experience of stress leads to the anxiety, the feeling of panic, depression, and then ultimately pain. And that pain, of course, puts you back into this cycle. And our bodies are supposed to have a mechanism to fight against stress called the fight or flight response. So you see a lion jump out into the street, your body goes into this fight or flight response, your muscles tense up, your blood pressure increases, your inflammatory mechanisms that are supposed to, stop yourself from getting injured, they go into hyperdrive and try to protect you from being killed by a bear. This is the same fight or flight response that we get when you just had this experience the other day. You come home and you see a ticket on your car. You're like, dang it, I don't have any money in my account. I can't pay this $80 ticket. I hate this ticket, the ticket lady. So that fight or flight response is something that we experience on a regular basis. And it's supposed to be adaptive for our body to either fight or fly or get away from danger. But in sickle cell disease, this constriction and the contracting of the blood vessels that leads to us being able to get blood to the place we're supposed to get it to when you're fighting something or you're running away, it's that same vasoconstriction that can lead to a traffic jam in your blood vessels. And so when the blood vessels, we all know what a vaso-occlusive crisis looks like, but if you're just thinking about that stress response, your body's clamping down on itself because your body's getting ready to fight or flee. But in sickle cell, that fight or flee response can actually contribute to or trigger a pain crisis. And the thing is just, again, like I said, if we don't ask about it, we don't know. Right? So if somebody's experiencing depression, they're going to more likely have an elevated stress or fight response. So when we looked at a systematic review of all the literature of everybody, all the studies we could find that looked at depression and sickle cell disease, we found that about 70% of the time patients are diagnosed with depression in the medical records. Sometimes it's as low as just 2%. So 2%, right? But when we ask patients, when they actually do a screener or they do an interview assessment, 22 to 57% of the time, patients are reporting clinically elevated symptoms. So physicians, providers, when you're going to the medical system and you're never asked, only about 7% of the time, and it's probably even lower than that, only about 7% of the time are we actually catching it. So we are very, very poor. Even as a psychologist, if I meet somebody, I have to ask you the correct questions. I can't just intuit that you are depressed or that you're anxious or that something's going on or that you feel like, you know what, it'd be better off if I were dead. I have to ask. I can't just feel it. I need to ask, right? And particularly in our community, we are really, really good at putting on a happy face, at dressing up and looking perfect and making it seem like everything's okay. So we are really, really good at putting on that show. But if we don't ask, if we don't have people that we can trust that are going to actually push our buttons or at least probe into what's going on with us. Oh, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing all right. Most people just keep on going, oh, good, great, wonderful. You're doing all right, just all right? Why just all right? And you keep asking those questions and you might get to find out what's going on underneath the surface. And so again, just more data just showing you that, hey, look, there's a lot of folks out here that are going through some stuff and we don't even know it. So 212 patients were screened at Pitt and Vanderbilt. And we found out of these 212 patients, 63 of them were experiencing depression and anxiety. So fortunately at Pitt and Vanderbilt, we have a clinical psychologist. So they have myself, and then at Vanderbilt, we had another psychologist counterpart. And so as psychologists, we were able to get the screeners done and identify these individuals who reported clinically significant depression and anxiety. So stuff is going on. The stress is more than what it typically is on a day-to-day basis. But we were only able to approach 37 out of 63. And so that means what we're doing is not sufficient because there was 24 individuals in just a short period that went away after saying, I have clinically significant depression or anxiety. Stuff is going on at home or right now or with my health that is really disturbing to me, and it is difficult for me to manage. And so after we asked those questions and we got that response, they just walked out the door and we didn't do anything. That's not okay, right? It's not okay. We need to do better. We need to do better. But the point I want you to take away here is that there's mental health that we see, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So that individual on Facebook who's saying, you know what, I want to end it. I want to, sickle cell can take over now. It's time for me to go home. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There are many, many individuals who above the surface look like everything is absolutely fine and okay. Below the surface, there is suffering that's going on, that their quality of life could be significantly improved. The way that they're living, their performance, everything, their interactions, their social life could be improved if we address the stuff that's going on under the surface. And that's depression, anxiety, trauma, psychosocial stress, and the things that we don't like to talk about. All right. So the let's just keep that in mind. So this is just another example. And I just pulled these out just to, just make it a little bit more real that, there's people in our community that are really suffering. And this has been a mechanism because, and I'll jump in the boat first as a medical provider, we're not doing enough to identify folks and provide the support that they need. And so the alternative is for people to get on Facebook, to get on social media and ask for help in a more demonstrative way. All right. So this individual said, in the hospital contemplating suicide, anyone know where the jugular vein is located in your neck? And if I stab it with my hospital fork, how long would it take to bleed out? So interestingly, he says, or what about the groin area? All right. But which spot is more effective? And then he says at the end, somebody come through. So somebody come through. So over all this, what is he really asking for? He's not asking about, okay, how can I actually kill myself? If we look more closely, he's just saying, hey, look, I need some support. I need somebody. I feel alone. And it would be great if somebody would come through and visit me. Of course, Kia, she was there praying for you, supporting you. She didn't come through though, but at least she provided something. And I think that's a lot of, for a lot of us, the reason why we use Facebook. We just need that immediate response. Like somebody knows me, somebody knows that I'm alive. I'm recognized. I'm not completely alone. But how much better would it be if that person actually came in person or actually got on the phone with Tony, right? All right. So we also realize that depression and anxiety, they're associated with pain events. And we found data to support that. And looking over 20,000 data for over 20,000 patients found that the higher level of depressive symptoms reported, the higher likelihood of being hospitalized that year. So individuals with sickle cell living with depression were much, much more likely to end up in the hospital that next year. And so we know just intuitively, we know that's true. And I've had warriors say, when my mind's not right, my body's not right. But if we know that's true, then why are we so focused on medication for the body when we really should be treating the mind first, right? All right. So what is depression? So if I'm feeling, or what Dr. Charles said, I haven't felt very good in a while. How do I know if I'm depressed or not? And it's a great question. I remember the first time I went through depression, I was in college, my senior year. I'd broken up with a girl that I was about to marry. And I remember I could not leave my bedroom. I was in bed probably all day, just looking out the window, skipping class, everything, not going out to hang out with folks. I was stuck. I was in a really dark place. And it took me a while. I didn't even realize until after I came out of that I was like, that was a depressed moment. That was depression. So for us, when we're trying to think about, hey, am I going through a depressive episode? Now, there's two components to this. It's not just, I feel tired. I don't have a good appetite. It's got to be these two components that we need to focus on. So one, that mood. It's like the leave me alone. If people are around you and it's like walking on eggshells around you, that's the mood we're talking about. Depressed, irritable, grouchy, on edge. You don't feel like yourself. You just can't remember the last time that you laughed and you really had a good time. Like that deep belly laugh, like laughing out loud. All right. And then anhedonia, and that's just a fancy way to say all the activities that you engage in, they're not pleasurable to you anymore. Whether it's playing cards or going shopping or even watching TV, and you usually do those things and you love doing them, or playing video games even, and you get on the video game, you're like, this game just sucks. But it's a game that 2 weeks ago you were completely engaged in. So the mood, anhedonia. So when one of these things is going on, we're like, that triggers a flag for me. It says, all right, let's ask a few more questions. And then we go on and we ask, okay, so loss of appetite. And we understand, opioids and other medications, they can affect your appetite. So, so just be aware of that. There's a lot of things that the symptoms of depression that are correlated or cross over or overlap with what's going on with your physical health with sickle cell. Sleep disturbance. I know a lot of warriors have sleep disturbance. That's probably the number one thing I'll ask about, and almost everybody endorses it. In fact, there's evidence that suggests that about 90% of warriors do have a sleep disorder at some point in time. Agitation or slowing in behavior. When you feel slowed down, like you're in mud, like you just can't move. It's just hard. Or on the opposite, if you're so agitated, you feel like you have ADHD, you just can't sit still. Fatigue, feeling of worthlessness and guilt. And you have that broken record going on in your head. And it's just telling you how horrible you are, what a terrible person you are, how you're going to fail, how you have failed, etc. That feeling of low self-esteem, like you just can't get yourself out of that mental funk. And then poor concentration, just not able to focus on things. And then, of course, like we talked about earlier, there's thoughts of death, suicide, and really that just hopelessness about life. Okay. All right. Now, the negative thoughts really encompass three main areas. Excuse me. So oftentimes we will experience negative thoughts about ourselves. I'm a bad person. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. Negative thoughts about the world. The world is out to get me. And now, mind you, sometimes there's a kernel of truth to that. There is discrimination in our society. And sometimes people do not have our best interests in mind. All right. But we need to separate that the world is out to get me. Everybody's out to get me. Nobody loves me. Everybody's just against me. Right. And so we can have that catastrophization about the world when it's really only true in very limited circumstances and very limited situations. And then negative thoughts about your future. I'm never going to get out of this funk. I'm always going to be stuck in this hospital bed. I'm never going to find love. I'm never going to have a future. All right. So those are they call it the cognitive triad. I'm running out of time. I want to make sure that we have enough time for discussion because I'm really interested to hear what you all have to say. Dysthymia is another disorder that you may not be familiar with, but it's a mild form of depression. And these are those individuals, you might know them, where they just have a dark cloud on them all the time. They just, maybe they get a little bit happy, but oftentimes just have a low mood, low self-esteem, and oftentimes are a little bit more negative about life. The glass is always half full. And so this is that Eeyore type of phenomenon. And the interesting thing is that as African Americans, we're more likely to have dysthymia than major depression. And so oftentimes we might just think, hey, this is just the way that I am because it's been going on for so long. It's been 2 years or more. I've felt like this. This is just the way that I am. But the reality is that's not the way that you are, and there is a better way. We talked about sleep, and sorry, Tiana, I'm just for sake of time, I'm just going to skip over some of this. I'm happy to talk about sleep. But I did want to get into a couple of things about what can we do about it, because I did want us to leave you with the mental health hacks, right? So first of all, just understanding how your negative thoughts lead into this cycle of perceived stress, depression, that physiological arousal that I was talking about, and those pain symptoms. So one of those things, if anybody watched G.I. Joe, they would always say, knowing is half the battle. So if you know that this external stressor is coming up, I was talking to a young man, he lost his grandfather. He said the next week I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, right, with acute chest. And so if we know that stressor, if a stressor is coming up, whether it's an exam, and we know what stress is going to do to our physical selves, we can at least start thinking about how we're going to address it. All right. And then you won't feel like that pain is so much is more controlling you than you're controlling it. It's important to understand it and see what your tendencies are and what your body is doing. Okay. So thoughts lead to that depression, anxiety, physiological arousal, and the pain symptoms. So thinking about that negative thought triad we're talking about, negative thoughts about yourself, negative thoughts about the world, and negative thoughts about your future, and how those negative thoughts and beliefs can lead to a pain crisis. Okay. So just being aware of that. Oops. That was a recording. All right. So I was just talking about, that little evil guy on your shoulder that's saying all those negative things to you. We need to make sure we address him or her, whatever you want to label it, and make sure that we externalize those negative thoughts and put them outside of ourselves. And so we can talk more about that, but I think it's really important to realize that the things that your negative self says to you, those are not reality. That's just your mind. Your mind is playing tricks on you. It's real life. Your mind is playing tricks on you. So just making sure we recognize that the things that our mind says are not always reality. All right, the 4 walls. These are the most important things. Obviously, I'm a huge advocate of mindfulness, acceptance, commitment therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. I want everybody to become a monk. Absolutely. So before you do that, before you go to the Himalayan mountains and decide to get into years of meditation, I want you to first think about hydration. If you're not hydrating yourself as somebody living with sickle cell, you're going to have poor mood, poor appetite, all these symptoms that are associated with depression. We know that hydration is absolutely critical for people without sickle cell, and it's even more so with sickle cell. So hydration even allows your brain cells to be more plump and function more effectively. So make sure you're staying hydrated. Nutrition. If I ask any warrior, how do you stay healthy? Nutrition is the number one thing that they say. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest your nutrition is associated with your mental health. So make sure you're taking care of your hydration, nutrition first. Exercise. Not saying you should go out and run a marathon by any means, or you should become a bodybuilder, but a little bit of exercise will keep the depressed mood and anxiety away. It is important to stay active. It doesn't need to be vigorous activity, but it needs to be some type of activity. So make sure you keep your body moving. All right. And then sleep. Can't emphasize this enough. My one tip for sleep: if you have a TV in your room, this is the indication. This is the time to get that TV out of your room. You cannot have a TV in your room. You're telling your brain that the bed is meant for watching TV, not for sleeping. The bed is only good for 2 things. Sleep is one of them, and you know the other thing. All right, so get that TV out of the room. Stop eating in your room. Stop being on the iPad in your room, in your bedroom. All right, and on your bed, get all that stuff out of there. Keep the bedroom as a sacred place for only one thing, and that should be, 2 things, and that should be sleep should be one of them. Okay. Presence and power. Presence and power. Our stance and the way we carry ourselves, and our Black women, they know this very, very well. If you stand up, strong, chest out, and powerful, we actually know that you'll have a physiological response. You'll have an increase in testosterone and a decrease in cortisol. So your stress hormones will be suppressed, and you'll have more actual physiological power by standing in a powerful way. All right. This is Black men. We like to take up a lot of space. The more space you take up, that actually increases your feelings of power and presence. All right. So there's a reason that we do the things that we do, but having knowledge that does it is really a great tool to have. So in fact, before I do a presentation, I'll sit and I'll jump around and do like a power pose in the elevator before I go and have a meeting that's really stressful or something like that. So it does work. So just do a power pose, whatever makes you feel powerful for 30 seconds at least. You can do it for 2 minutes. All right. Yeah, just think about yourself, 100-meter dash, Olympics. You're crossing the finish line first. What is the first thing that you're going to do? You're not going to put your head down. You're not going to be, oh, woe is me. You're going to feel powerful. You're going to look powerful. So your body, you got to fake it till you make it. Your body will do, and then your mind will follow. All right. All right. Breathing, deep breathing. I'm going to skip over this one. Everybody knows about deep breathing. Last thing I want to say is diaries. Diaries. For those who keep a diary, you know how important it is. But for everybody else, when you're feeling down, just take a few minutes, take 20 minutes, write everything that's on your mind. Just 20 minutes, just set a timer, go, I'm going to write for 20 minutes, whatever it is, even if it's gibberish, just write it down. All that emotion, all that anger, get that out on paper. Doing that for just 3 days straight, just for writing continuously for just 20 minutes has been shown to decrease stress, decrease depression, and actually improve your immune response. So just doing this positive writing exercise, this emotional writing exercise, can actually help your body fight off illness. So that's the last thing I'm going to leave you with. I'm going to pass through all these things. I can get back to it if you like. I have a lot of tips. Last thing I have to leave you with is do not isolate. It is such a what is the word that I'm looking for? It is something. It feels comfortable to be alone and isolate when we're feeling bad, particularly for many of our warriors that are used to doing things on their own, and it's been exhausting leaning on others. But just the fact that you're in this chat and you're part of this community means that you have people to connect with and you have people that care, and you're using your resources to stay connected. So please do not take that first, the thing that feels oftentimes most comfortable, and just kind of hide and take it on yourself. Don't isolate. Stay close to your supports. Make sure you lean on other people. All right. We do not need to be strong, because trying to do it on our own, carry the load too long on our own, will undoubtedly lead to disaster in the end. And then, of course, flipping it around, if you see somebody else who's isolating, like we said, sometimes we just need to ask the question. You just need to ask the question, how are you feeling? If they say, oh, I'm doing fine, and you can tell that there's something more there, let's take a little bit more time out and just see what's going on. I know we can't offer everything, but offering something. We have evidence that even just offering a little bit of help, just saying, hey, I'm available for a call if you want it. Even if they don't call, that's been associated with improvements in depression. So that's all from me for now. Of course, it'll always love talking about the Charisma study, where we're offering cognitive behavioral therapy via digital means to warriors living with, with sickle cell, adults living with sickle cell. A lot of people were involved with this. Have to thank all these folks, because it's a community effort. And just, again, never leave people alone. All right. Thank you so much. And yeah, let's have a discussion about mental health.
Sorry, I was muted. Wow. So we need to have like a series or a part 2, because there's a lot to unpack with your presentation. There's so much that resonated with me. I'm glad that you started about kind of that cycle with stress and pain. I felt like, and you've heard me say this, that like probably 95% of my crisis in high school, I felt like were brought on by stress.
Yeah.
And I felt like had my pediatric team focused more on my mental health, I would have been out of the hospital, and I just would have been healthier as a whole person. So that was important to me. I'm glad that you touched on the isolation, because we see that a lot with adults with sickle cell. But one of the things that also resonates with me as the CEO of SC Red is that you take for granted that isolation can actually start very early for children with sickle cell, because like delayed puberty, when you're in that locker room and you don't look the same as all your peers, isolation starts right there. And so, again, this was an amazing presentation, and just thank you for becoming such a staple, a trusted resource in this community. So I'm going to bring up our other panelists so that we can get into this conversation. It's a lot of us tonight, but I'm excited. We're so excited. I could not have had this roundtable without having every single one of these people up here. So we're going to start by having everybody go around and introduce themselves. So Dr. Charles and I don't think we have to introduce ourselves, but I'll just go in order. So Phil, do you want to start?
Hold on a second. My wife is calling. Sorry to take this.
Oh, you got to go.
Listen, I know how that is. I got baby girl calling me right now on the phone. So Chima says hi, by the way.
That's my girl. Do you want me to have somebody else go so you can take that real quick?
No, it's good. So my name is Phillip Okwo, sickle cell warrior based in Atlanta, Georgia. Warrior and advocate. I got 2 young kids, 7 and 4. My son is 7, my daughter's 4. And this was actually a really, really insightful conversation, because it resonated on so many levels, to kind of the lived experience, but also the experience seen by so many other warriors just that have either had the opportunity to advocate for or the opportunity to mentor. And it's helpful to have some of these hacks. Some of them we kind of pick up along the way, but it's always helpful to have new ones because, listen, it's I'm preaching to the choir on this one, but the condition is brings many challenges, and life be lifing, right? So to have as many coping skills as possible is very key. So appreciative of the presentation and looking forward to the discussion.
Perfect. Jamie, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Jamie Roque. I have 2 boys with sickle cell disease. One of them's turning 16 tomorrow, and the other one's 11. And I have a 13-year-old daughter sandwiched in between. She has E trait. And I also have an organization here in Dallas for kids affected by sickle cell. And we just know personally firsthand how important the mental health piece is to the comprehensive care of people with sickle cell and their families. And we just personally have really benefited from the psychology program at our clinic, and then just other outside resources that have added those tools to my kids' toolboxes of, dealing with the issues that come along with having a chronic illness or having a sibling that has a chronic illness. And so I'm just honored to be a part of this panel discussion and looking forward to it.
Deasia.
Hi guys, I'm Deasia. I'm a warrior from Michigan. I have type SC. I'm really excited for this panel. I do deal with anxiety and depression. So I'm really excited for this because a lot of warriors don't talk about it. And I think when people see someone else talk about it, then they want to talk about it. So definitely excited.
Right. And before I go to Dr. Crosby, I do just want to say from a personal and professional standpoint, I am incredibly proud of you. I know this is your first time doing this, and did it with SC, right? We come out of the gate swinging and we get a lot of views. So this is and I'm proud of you, but we have you. This is a great group, and we have you. So Dr. Crosby.
Thanks.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Lori Crosby. I'm a psychologist at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And I'm really excited to see mental and behavioral health become such a focus in sickle cell. Like Charles said, we've been doing this work for a while, and it's just finally gratifying that people are understanding that mind-body connection. And I just want to give you a quick hack that I like. So think about whether you are mindful, meaning your mind is full of a lot of things, or are you mindful, so you're present and really observing and taking a moment to be mindful about how you are in the space, how you are feeling, what is happening. And if we can remember to do the second one when we experience the first one, that will really get us towards that mental wealth that we're all trying to achieve.
I love that. That's we're going to have to get a recording and just have you say that again, because that's an amazing hack. So Dr. Charles and Dr. Lori Crosby, everybody in the sickle cell community knows them and recognizes them. They're my go-tos. Everybody goes tos for mental health and STD. But I'm super excited to introduce somebody who maybe is an unfamiliar face. That is Dr. Diane Chandler. She and I went to the same church and grew up together, and I've watched her get her PhD and start a private practice and all this good stuff. So without taking away from your story, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Go ahead. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Dr. Diane Chandler. I do have a private practice here in the St. Louis, Missouri area. I also have a doctorate in counselor education and supervision. So in addition to working with clients, adults, couples, teens, who suffer with grief and loss, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety. I also like to work with graduate students who are just coming into the field. I also always like to mention that as a woman of faith, I think it's extremely important for me to advocate for integrating spirituality with mental health, particularly in the Black community, and integrating that in the work that I do with my clients. I'm excited to be here. This topic is a real passion for me, and it's great to meet all of you.
Thank you. We're going to come back to you on the faith part. But Dr. Crosby, you said something so I had an outline, but we're not going to follow it. Dr. Crosby, you said something that has also been really clear to me, kind of about how there's more focus on mental health. I feel like it's been stigmatized for so long, and I think that it still is stigmatized. We have a long way to go, but what do you attribute the change to that we are now starting to have these conversations?
It's a great question, and I think there are a couple of factors. One is that there's also been an increase in elevating the voices of individuals, caregivers. And so as that comes to the front, it was very clear in Dr. Jonassaint's research that as that comes to the front and we hear those voices, we hear about it more, and people have to recognize that they just can't ignore it as much. I think people are understanding and appreciating some of the discrimination and bias in the world and how that really does have an impact on health. You know, we're talking about weathering now. There were some of us talking about that, 2 decades ago, but there were some of us who weren't. Many of us weren't, but now that's being talked about more regularly. And then finally, I think our health system is understanding that your mood and your social conditions have a significant impact on your health. And they've been trying to go about it sometimes with medicine only, and it hasn't worked. That mind-body connection is essential to really improving overall health. So I think those are some of the major reasons. And then we have more psychologists in this field, which I love, and social workers and counselors than we've ever had before. And I'm sure my colleagues will agree. I mean, they just didn't exist, and now we're getting graduate students, as Dr. Chandler talked about, and others who are actually interested in wanting to go into this field. And it's really an exciting time for that, because we're also building, hopefully, a cadre of providers to help as we continue in this work and to serve the next generation.
Perfect. I'll go to you, Dr. Charles, because in your presentation, you kind of highlighted some of the contributing factors to sickle cell and like mental health. So like you talked about sleep and isolation, being in the hospital, the stigma. I know this is probably like a layered question, but would it be your recommendation that every individual with sickle cell disease should seek out therapy?
Yeah, absolutely. And why not? If you had the opportunity to make your car faster, like, so, if you have a Tesla, they give you this little, you can get an upgrade and it can make your Tesla faster. And, of course you have to pay for it. What if they were giving it to you for free? Wouldn't you want to do that? Right. And so I think regardless, even if you're going at, 100 miles per hour, you still want to go at 120. And why not maximize yourself?
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to get into the why nots in just a second, because I've been super transparent kind of about my experiences with therapy. I've tried 3 times, and every time just completely turned me off. But it kind of opens up the floor, because I do want to have a conversation, and then I'm going to bring in Phil and Deasia and Jamie. I want to have a conversation about managing expectations, because I think that in my mind, I felt like I should just go to a therapist. We should hit it off, and that should be it. And I should leave every time feeling better. That's really what I expected. So I want to hear from Dr. Crosby, Dr. Charles, and Dr. Chandler, like, talk to me about what we should expect from therapy. So whoever wants to start.
Well, since my mic is on, but I think that if you're going to go into therapy, you should expect to do work. So it's a two-sided relationship. I think that the least, and as a therapist, I want it to be a rewarding experience as well, right? And so, it's like going to the gym, and if you just look at your trainer, you're like, all right, lift the weights for me. And I expect to get in shape and, get buff or whatever your goals are. You should expect, getting out of, particularly if you've been suffering from depression and anxiety for a long time, it's like climbing out of hell on a red hot ladder. Sometimes it's like, ooh, I don't want to do that work. I think, hell's not that hot because that red hot ladder is super hot. And I know I'm going to get burned. And you are going to get burned. You're going to start talking about some things that you don't want to talk about. You're going to start having to go home and do some homework and work on things that you don't want to work on, that you're too tired to work on. Right. And so, but that's going to make it a fruitful and fulfilling experience. If you go to a therapist and all they're doing is sitting around and you guys are talking about dogs and cats and, your favorite show on TV, forget about it. That's not what you should be looking for. So I think you should expect to do work.
Right. And I think that I know for me, I expected to do work, but I want to bring in Dr. Chandler because is it a possibility that I was going to the wrong therapist?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Unfortunately, that could have been one of the reasons. I think when we think about managing expectations, we also have to consider your personal negative stigmas and unwillingness that you're taken into seeking mental health therapy, your own personal biases. And there has to be some degree of self-awareness to that. Some of that may be generational, or it could be something in the present. So being those thoughts of, I can't feel, I have to be sad, I have to be depressed, I can't talk to someone outside of home, the family, but only God. I have to be tough, I have to get over it. It'll go away eventually. It's not what Black people do. So those are some things that we have to be mindful of. And I think when this self-awareness takes place, then there's an exchange of a safe place. It's a give and take between you and the therapist. It's a psychoeducational experience. But it has to start with that safe place in order to do that. You can't go in there and just let it all out. That it is the therapist's responsibility to create that space for you to feel non-judgmental, to say that it's okay, to normalize your feelings, your sadness, your depression, your loneliness, your frustration, your fear of dying, grief around you. And then the different cognitive interventions come. The person-centered theory comes, the identification of irrational thoughts, dysfunctional thoughts. But first, it's creating that safe place, that non-judgmental place. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. So you walk away feeling disconnected.
Right. I appreciate that. And while I have you, we were kind of talking about some of the things that may keep someone from seeking out this help. Like I said earlier, we grew up in the same church. That's how we know each other. Our families know each other from church. And so I feel like as a child, maybe into my adult years, that was a lot of what kept me from seeking mental health was like this, just pray about it, take it to the Lord in prayer attitude. And so what is your advice to people of faith who don't know how to reconcile having faith and therapy because they feel like it undermines their faith?
This is the way I like to think of it. Let's think of faith and religion as being our weapons. And let's think of therapy as being the strategic work that we do with these weapons. However, faith without works is dead.
Right.
You can have therapy and God, and it's extremely important that people of color know that. So it's two things that go together,
Yeah.
and they work very well. Very well.
I love that answer. I love that response. I really appreciate that. That honestly helps me too. Dr. Crosby, so I have a question in the chat from somebody that we both know, Francine Baker, who is a caregiver. And she wants to know, is it possible to get help without reliving the trauma?
Mm, that's a really great question.
Yeah.
And I think it depends on what you mean by reliving the trauma, right? Because in therapy, with those tools and works that Dr. Chandler was talking about, there should be ways to approach reprocessing that trauma in a different way. And that might mean taking pieces of it instead of the whole thing. There might be other ways that that you might approach it that might really help till eventually the narrative becomes different and the lessons that you take and move forward on, you act differently because you're hearing and thinking about it differently. So it's possible that you will reprocess the trauma, but hopefully in a way that allows you to move forward, in a way that allows you to be healthier and have different thoughts. Dr. Jonassaint talked about that triad, that cognitive triad. So the goal is to reprocess, not necessarily re-experience the trauma in the same way. My colleagues help me out if I was not clear, if you want to add anything.
I think it goes back to being, again, in that safe place. It's different than talking to your friends about trauma than speaking to a therapist about trauma. There are interventions, it may just seem like a conversation, but it's not. There's tools and interventions that we use that help you safely navigate through that trauma. You have to remember that in trauma, the brain naturally wants you to forget. Becoming self aware is part of the healing process. So the therapist, the psychologist navigates you through that until you become whole again.
Well, I'm really glad you said that because honestly, I think that used to be one of my things too. I used to be like, I don't know why I need to go and vent to somebody that I don't know. I could just talk to my mom. But okay, so that helps me that there's some tools and some expertise that you probably can't just get from any old body who doesn't have this training. So let's bring in, it's always important to talk about the lived experience. So I wanted to bring in Phil, Deasia, and Jamie. So one of the things that resonates about the three of you for me is that you've all been very transparent. I hope it's not just with me and that it's with the community. And if it's just with me, then now you're about to be transparent with the whole community. But I've learned a lot from the three of you about the importance of prioritizing mental health. So Jamie, I'm going to start with you because I think it was a Facebook post that literally made me reach out to you to invite you to this roundtable because you were talking about the importance of prioritizing your children's mental health. And so I want to hear from you a little bit about how you knew to be that in tune with your children and their mental health.
Well, I just personally think that everybody should go see a therapist when they become an adult. Like, I just think that should be like a rite of passage when you leave your parents' home, regardless of the home you came from, the setting you came from, there's going to be things to work through. And there's going to be things that, tools that you might need in the future. And so for me personally, I knew that my kids were going to have issues, not just growing, not just a home environment, but they're dealing with a chronic illness. They're dealing with constantly feeling different from their peers. They're dealing with, people asking them why they got to sit out during PE or, why they're struggling in a sport that they normally dominate in. and they're dealing with those thoughts of, why me? Why do I have to be the one in the hospital bed? They're dealing with the anxiety of, swallowing pills every day, or, there's just all kinds of things that come along with it. And our clinic has a psychologist on staff. I think a lot of, children's hospitals usually do. And, they just kind of, as part of the program, they meet with the kids for a year, 2 years, whatever they need. And they kind of teach them just all kinds of different coping mechanisms.
Uh-oh, did we lose her? Okay, well, hopefully we get her back. But okay, Deasia, let's go to you. Because we've had a lot of conversations about the relationship that you have with your therapist. And I want to know something about, first of all, what made you seek out therapy?
So I seeked out therapy because I just knew something was wrong. Like, I'm normally like a very social person, and I started to become like very isolated, just wanted to be by myself, canceling plans, wanted to sleep all the time, like not the normal me. And so and it happened during COVID. Like, I knew it was before COVID, but I think being in the house definitely made it worse. So I don't think I started therapy until like 2021, but it was just becoming so bad. Like, I was randomly crying all the time. Like, I just couldn't control my emotions. So I'm like, I think I should probably, seek out before things get worse. And I'd rather try to fix it now and get it under control before, thoughts take over.
Okay, that's great. Phil, what about you? Because we've also had conversations about therapy and your experience. You've had a pretty positive experience. So what was the first step to making you say, I need help?
Yeah, excellent question. For me, my first exposure to therapy happened while I was in grad school. And it was a season of a lot of change happening. Within a year, went from, working at one specific job, meeting somebody, going well, proposing, marrying, finding out we were expecting, and then starting grad school, which was, it had been 11 years or 12 years since I had finished undergrad. So in many respects, I was relearning how to be a student. I was preparing, learning to be a dad for our son that was on the way. I was learning to be a husband, and all these things were just colliding. And so my performance was challenged in grad school. And so I only, I had just happened to be walking past on campus, UCLA. They have counseling and psychological services, so it's called CAPS. And I didn't have the reference point of therapy. I didn't know anybody who went to therapy or anything like that, but it was free for students. And I was like, hey, I'm here. I got nothing to lose. I'm trying to figure out how to make it out of this program without losing all of my fellowship money. And so yeah, it was something that for me helped put a name on the issue that I was having. A lot of it was a bunch of adjustment disorder, but then I was also diagnosed with adult attention deficit. And even just from that diagnosis, before there was any prescription or anything, like understanding that helped me reorient myself to all the things that were on my plate. And I literally went from being on academic probation to dean's list by the time the program was over. So it was like just understanding that neurodivergence, and then learning to manage it amidst all the changes was huge. It was key, and it was a big success story. And I was very sympathetic to your story about having gone to different therapists or counselors and not necessarily having a good experience. And for me, because that season was also the beginning of me, relocating from Atlanta to Los Angeles, then to Houston. It was my first job after grad school. And then I'm back to Atlanta, all within a very short period, kind of starting that process over. And there are all these different cities helped teach me that, that's something that I've told friends that if you are trying to, pursue therapy for the first time, don't hesitate to make like multiple appointments with a number of different folks, because it's in certain respects, it's not totally unlike a romantic partner, where you kind of, part of it is just the fit. You kind of see if they have what you need, kind of like on paper, but then there's also that kind of unspoken, untangible, that X factor, that vibe that you have with them. And so, you know, I regularly tell people, like, schedule like 3 to 5 different appointments, like back to back to back with different providers, and go and see. And you know, because sometimes it could be the wrong therapist, but sometimes it's the right therapist, but the wrong modality, right? Or sometimes, you know, so all these things are just, you know, you get a better sense of how to calibrate that the more you've been in therapy. So I think, since my journey started in 2015, wow, it's crazy to think it's going on 8 years now, right? So, so yeah, so there's that was how the journey started. This is how it's going. It's been really well. It's been a lot of challenges for me during not just the COVID season, but divorce and custody and all those things. And to Dr. Chandler's point, you know, staying spiritually grounded has been a huge part of that for me. And I really appreciate even just how this chat was named, with the Battle of the Mind. It actually reminds me of, there's a book called I Declare War, by Levi Lusko, who's a pastor. I forget where, but the subtitle is Winning the Battle of the Mind, or Winning the Battle with Yourself. And I have a good group of guys, a kind of a tribe of guys who we do like a daily check-in, and it's kind of its own form of therapy, a bit of group therapy. But that's a book that I've added to it's on our list. So we haven't gotten into it yet in our men's group. But if you wanted to jump on that, Tiana, or anybody else on the call, I'm happy to read it with you, because it's got a good kind of balance of kind of spiritual with, you know, some of the basic, like the 4 walls that Dr. Jonassaint mentioned earlier in the presentation. So,
well, I'm going to take you up on that, because you know me, I will crash. So I thank you for the invitation. I will be there. I'll get in on that. And I'm really glad that you talked about kind of like that support system that you have with other men, because I think that a lot of times there's already a stigma around mental health. But I know when we did our firesides that you were on, it was a lot of guys coming on there with all of this like anxiety and depression, but they were too embarrassed to admit it because they felt like they had to just be the provider and be strong. So that's another reason that it was really important for me to have you on here, to just kind of give that male perspective and let men know, like, it's okay to get some help. So, Deja, I'm going to come back to you, because Phil also kind of brought attention to something that I wanted to tap into, is that a lot of times for me, I was like, I don't need to see a therapist, because like sickle cell, I have it under control, I'm fine. But to Phil's point, it's not just sickle cell. It's like everyday life pressures of having a job and keeping up and, you know what I mean, making money and all of these things. So when you are talking to your therapist, how much of it is sickle cell and how much of it is just everyday life?
I would say 95% of it is just like regular life stuff. I literally just started talking about sickle cell. Like, I would tell her, like, when I was in the hospital, how it would make me feel, but I never like really got into depth of how sickle cell actually affects me mentally until recently. And she's like, wow, we never really talk about it, or you don't let me talk about it. You kind of just like switch subjects. But I think the biggest thing that I do talk about is the withdrawal. The withdrawal process of sickle cell is probably the thing that messes up my mental the most, because it's like the withdrawal and depression is 2 different things, but it's combining and it's beating you up at the same time. And so like the medication, all of it is just like one big fight. So sometimes, like, it's been times where I've called her during withdrawal and I'm like really struggling right now and I really need somebody because I'm losing my mind. But it's like, I know that it's just the withdrawal instead of the depression, but sometimes it's really hard to like tell the 2 apart because it's so much the same. Especially like the chemical imbalance from leaving all of the medication after the hospital and stuff like that. It's just like, it's very hard. But I think now I'm going to start talking about it more because it's being held in too much.
Okay, so Dr. Charles mentioned that a little bit in his presentation. He was like, some things is medication. And so when you're talking about withdrawal, you're talking about when you're in the hospital, you're on narcotics, and then you come home and you're off of those narcotics.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Because, like, I personally, when I'm in the hospital, I'm on the PCA pump. So I'm getting pumped and pumped and pumped and pumped. And then when I get home, I'm just off of a pill, and it's not the same. So now it's like I'm going through the cold sweats, I'm going through the emotions, I'm going through just everything at one time. And then I also take medication for my depression and anxiety. So it's like my last visit, they went like 4 days without actually giving me my depression medicine. And I've learned that after 3 days, I start to like fall off. Like I can tell the difference from when I'm on my medication. And I was asking for it, but I don't know what went wrong there. But yeah, it's very complicated.
Wow. So Dr. Jonassaint, Dr. Crosby, Dr. Chandler, is there any like response that you would have to Deasia? She's not the only one who's gone through withdrawal. So what would you say to her?
You know, the one thing I thought about while you were talking, and that's for all of you here, the warriors here, and also those who are listening, and you managed to get up the nerve to go see a mental health therapist, provider, whether it's a psychologist or therapist. Make it an exchange of information. Make it a psychoeducational experience, because the therapist needs to know what you are going through in order to help you. It should be a two-way process, because I don't understand how Deasia, when you said most of the time it's just anxiety and depression, and 5% or 10% of the time it's talking about SCD.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't see how you can separate the two as a therapist when you're in treatment.
Yeah.
And so that may be a great educational opportunity for you to share that, and the therapist to help you, just knowing that, to get at those, deeper levels. Sometimes you just can't tread the top of the water.
Yeah.
Go a little lower in order to make some progress.
Mm-hmm.
So for yourselves and those who are listening, therapists need to be professionals, need to be taught. There should be an exchange of educational back and forth, especially in the early part of treatment.
Yeah, I really like how you put it. When you're really connected with the therapist, you're vibing with them. And it's a relationship. And how can two walk together if they're not going in the same direction? You really do have to have that link. And I love that idea of, because when Tiana told me about her troubles with therapists before, and anybody who says that, I said, just keep trying. So scheduling with 5, that's a fantastic idea. I'm stealing that 100%. And as a therapist, and you should never feel, I know I said you got to expect to do work, but as somebody, a client, you should never feel guilty if it's not working out, because as therapists, at least I was trained, if they're not getting better, it's either because it's the wrong therapist or it's the wrong therapy. And I think others have said something very similar. So, so being able to feel comfortable if that person is walking you through talking about that trauma, bringing up that trauma, talking about sickle cell, talking about those things that you're embarrassed about, and it feels natural, like that's exactly the relationship you want. It's interesting. We do not talk about this, and Dr. Crosby, you might have a better perspective, but I don't feel like we talk about opioids and the effect that it has mentally, emotionally on our warriors, on anybody, period. At least for cancer, there's a little bit more evidence, but I've seen young men and women who are the absolutely most fantastic people in the world, and on opioids, on a PCA pump, they're completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course it's the instigation of the pain in combination with the bad environment, in combination with, the just the stress all coming together. But as soon as those opioids start hitting your bloodstream, start hitting your brain, you will feel a personality change, experience a personality change. And I've heard that a lot. But there should be some plan, because, and we've talked about this too in our team meetings about that withdrawal. We'll just kick, because the hospital, we are, we're kind of pushed, we're motivated to get patients out by 10 a.m., at least at UPMC. So we want to get patients out of the bed. We round what patients can leave by 10 a.m. tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. And so now there's a plan, but nobody's thought about, okay, well, they're getting 2 mics of Dilaudid continuously, right? So how are they going to go home on their home meds after that? Nobody thinks about the withdrawal. So that's not part of the plan, the discharge plan. So that's a major failure on the medical system part, not on the patient part. However, sometimes you got to manage up too and just say, hey, look, I'm ready to go home. And at the same time, I'm not ready to do with the withdrawal. So we need to come up with a plan. I'd love to hear if anybody else has a solution, but at least in our medical system, we do not have a solution to that, although we have acknowledged it's an issue.
Yeah, we see it in our kids. We see a lot of anxiety. The medicine, sometimes the withdrawal can cause some anxiety. Sometimes it causes depression, but sometimes it causes that anxiety. And so, once they're teenagers and they've been living this life for a while, they're able to say like, hey, I noticed when I got home, I was just anxious. I was just like, sometimes I'm scratching. I'm just anxious. I'm just feel unsettled. And so, if they have a provider on the team, like Jamie was saying, and we're, aware, we can try to help and plan some things and try to work with the team around that in pediatrics. But I just wanted to say one thing to follow up that kind of goes along with this. But it's really, to me, it's super important that you find a therapist that understands chronic disease and understands what it's like to live with a chronic disease, because that usually has required some training, whether it's on the job training, meaning you've just worked with a lot of people with chronic diseases and you've learned, or you've had actual courses and supervision and things like that. I think that is really important. Mm-hmm. And that might be why sometimes you don't feel a fit or a vibe with someone, because they don't have that training or experience. The other thing I would say, and I use the same analogy with a physical trainer. If I go to a trainer and I don't like that trainer or like what that trainer does, I don't say there's not a trainer out there for me. I just say I'm going to a different trainer. I'm not paying my good money to work with this person who I am not vibing with. And so, we should think the same way about therapists. We just have to find that person who can vibe with us, who works with us, who pushes us, but in the way we need to be pushed and in a way that's consistent. And we're ready for. We can handle it.
Mm-hmm. I love all of that. Just going back to the withdrawal part of it, I'll just give a shameless plug to Johns Hopkins and my own hematologist, Sophie Lansgrom, because when Deasia was talking to me about that withdrawal, it was kind of lost on me because my team does a very good job. Like, I have to be on orals in the hospital for at least 48 hours before they send me home. Like, I can't go home if I was just on IV meds the day before. But one of the things that I have noticed on narcotics is, like, I do have that personality change. Like, everything irritates me. Like, people snacking is one thing at home, but when I'm in the hospital, I am furious. Like, and it was something that I didn't really realize. I kind of took for granted. And so I'm really glad that we touched on that. So we have like 15 minutes left. And so what I want to do, we have all different types of perspectives here. And I really appreciate that. I have, and it really was making me emotional looking at the presentation, because I've been getting a lot of calls and texts from warriors who are ready to give up. And like you said, they're not saying like, I'm going to kill myself tonight, but they are saying like, look, if I don't wake up tomorrow, I'm fine. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to just kind of go around the round table and hear from all of you. I want to just end on a message of hope. So from the warrior standpoint, the caregiver standpoint, and the provider standpoint, just to all the people listening and all the people who will replay this, what are you going to say to people who are struggling to get out of bed in the morning?
Wow. I'll jump in on that. Funny enough, I actually I met with my therapist earlier today. And that was not planned, by the way. That's just how it worked out. But I think it's interesting. For one, it's an opportunity to encourage or admonish those who are at that point to consider if they have not yet. But I think a thing for me, right? The presentation alluded to how, generally speaking, you see how when you're dealing with depression and anxiety, it accompanies additional complications with sickle cell and or hospitalization. And I was marveling, dealing with divorce and custody is one of those things that feels like it's never ending. So most of my session today was about that. But one of the things that we were kind of marveling about was the realization that, for one, even though I was dealing with depression and anxiety, well, I had a second opinion say dysthymia, I don't know, but whatever. That was also mentioned in the presentation. But either way, having those things kind of concurrently, and not having had seen the flare up, right? Last time I was hospitalized for my sickle cell was 2016, which is kind of before life started doing all those things. But then also realizing that I was able to kind of manage through COVID and the isolation, which again was another thing in the presentation. You don't want to isolate. But I think it was the realization that through all those years of therapy that I had, I guess, kind of accumulated the tools to kind of stay centered through the imbalances and things like that. And I had never really kind of gotten to that point of wanting to give up because of the sickle cell, maybe because generally speaking, it wasn't as severe, but certainly the divorce and custody stuff had sometimes taken me to that point where it's just like, it feels like it's kind of pointless to fight in terms of the way this thing is kind of, the way this game is kind of set up. So the thing, I guess, the message of hope that I hope some of the viewers would take away is that it is work. Therapy is work, right? Or as Dr. Jonassaint said, it's a red hot ladder out of hell, right? But I heard it said also similarly somewhere else that if you're going through hell, keep going, right? Like don't stop, like don't get comfortable in hell, right? And so, as painful as that sounds sometimes, just being clear on even those four walls are a very kind of simple thing in terms of like keeping yourself steady and renewed and pouring back into yourself to be able to get back up and face those challenges. And then, of course, having kind of a spiritual foundation, having a family, having a tribe of people who kind of are there to even just encourage you or even just do a daily check-in. Those things go so far. They go such a long way. And I think even the amount I've been able to kind of stick through a lot of this journey, and it seems to be nearing an end, which is kind of bittersweet. But like, I attribute a lot of it to just that practice of kind of getting up and doing the work, right? So be encouraged. Don't be afraid of that red hot ladder, because again, if you're going through hell, you got to keep going to get out. So
I love that. So I'm actually going to go to Deasia and Jamie because I'm going to reframe that question for the providers on the call. So Deasia, what's like your message of hope?
So like 2 weeks ago, I was literally on Facebook, ready to kind of like give up, very tired and exhausted from living with sickle cell, because I was just looking at it like, I'm 26 and I'm dealing with this now. What is it going to be like 30 years from now? Like, is it going to get worse? Do I have to keep dealing with this? How am I going to keep dealing with it? But just talking to some people, it's like, I have a purpose. I found my purpose. Self-care. You need a lot of self-care. Even when you don't want to go to the gym, go to the gym. If you don't want to do it, you have to like push yourself to really do it. Because when you don't feel like doing something, you literally have to do it, because depression can definitely take over and keep you in bed. But self-care is the most important thing. Work out, drink, go for a walk, get some sunlight. Sunlight is finally coming out for everybody now, so the depression is unthawing. you know. But yeah, having that circle of people to keep you going and keep you motivated, take away all the negativity. I know a lot of people have a lot of negative people in their lives. You have to push them out no matter who they are. It could be parents, it could be friends. You have to keep the negativity out, because they will keep you down. You need to be up here to the top. So yeah, keep going. You got this.
I love that, because it just kind of reiterates what Dr. Chandler was saying about faith without works is dead. Like, there are some things that you have to do. And again, on a personal note, you killed that. I'm so proud of you for this to be your first time. We can't. So Jamie, what about you? What's your message of hope?
Well, hopefully I don't get booted in the middle of it again. But, I really liked in the presentation that image of the little girl and the Wonder Woman, because one of the things my son learned in his clinic with the psychologist was the power of his mind and imagining himself as his hero. And, there's something that somebody said to me many years ago. She has a sibling who has sickle cell, and she said her mom always said that her sibling was extraordinary because he had to do all the extra just to be ordinary. And it's true. People with sickle cell, they have to do all these extra things just to do what ordinary people do. Think about all the layers you got to put on just to go outside, all the hydration you got to do just to stay healthy, all the, watching the weather, all these things you got to do just to be a normal person. And I think that's something to keep in mind. Maybe when you practice that pose, that strength pose, you are your hero. You are other people's heroes because you do all the extra just to be ordinary. And I don't know how anybody cannot be inspired by our sickle cell warriors and all the things that they do just to live a normal life.
I love that. Thank you.
Okay.
I needed that myself. Okay.
And I didn't
that.
So it's not going to be necessarily a different question. I still wanted to end on a message of hope from the providers, but just reframing it a little bit, because I think the thing, and Deasia kind of touched on this a little bit, is like we have a chronic illness. So that feels very final and very permanent. And like for me, my biggest thing that I'm dealing with is infertility, but not just not being able to get pregnant, but rationalizing the fact that I'll never feel my baby kick or never breastfeed my child. All of those things feel very permanent. Mm-hmm. So from a provider standpoint, what would you say to a warrior who feels like they can't work through this because it's not going anywhere? Dr. Crosby, I'll start with you.
So the first thing I would say is that, it's there's a season for everything, and there are things that we can't control and things that we can control, right? And so again, we cannot always control our trauma or what happens to us, but we can control how we process it, what we take forward. And that's the part we can control. And so there may be some things that we can't control. Like some people living with sickle cell disease, the heat is a problem or the cold is a major problem. For others, it's not. They cannot necessarily control the weather, but they can control the layering, the other things. There are tools and other things. There are things we can do related to our minds and our thinking, our perspective that we can control. So, many women, just as an example for you, Tiana, many women in this country deal with that, exactly what you're going with related to infertility. And, for each woman, there is a series of steps, a process to kind of manage that. And so it's figuring out what that is. So that's what I would say about the permanent part. But I did want to say one other thing is I believe we were born in this world to be connected to others. And that is our purpose and job. As you talked about a purpose, that is one of our purposes, is to be in connection with others. And so you never know, an interaction that you have could change another person's life. And it could be the smallest interaction. Sometimes people come back and told me, you said this to me, and it just made all the difference. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I wasn't even, I wasn't on a webinar, I wasn't doing whatever. I was just talking to someone, but you never know. And so, each day provides a series of opportunities for you to change a life. So you wanted me to give you a message of hope. That is the message of hope I'm going to end with.
I love that. Dr. Jonassaint, what's your message of hope?
Lori, you're killing me. Dr. Crosby stole my thing. No, it is. It's definitely all about a testimony, right? Like, SC Red would not be here if it were not for something negative happening in your life. When I was, yes, I have all this education now, but I almost failed out of high school, didn't get into graduate school the first time, was depressed living with my parents. I'm like, my life is over. But I used that testimony. If I didn't go through that, there's so many people I would not have been able to reach. And I've used that story so many times in my academic lectures, et cetera. And so, and it's encouraging for somebody. So what we lose might be gain for somebody else, and to keep that perspective. The other thing is that keep the spirituality. You may not be a Christian, obviously, I know a lot about the Bible and I don't know much about other religions, but I think every spiritual journey is the exact components that we use for therapy. All the things, there are so many things in the Bible that are consistent with what we teach in therapy. And so whatever religion or spirituality you want to follow, I think it's always really, really helpful. And the last thing is that I've been doing this for 20 years. And things are better now for sickle cell than they have ever been. Yeah. I'm not saying it's fantastic, but I'm saying help is on the way. It's going to get better. So please jump on the train, keep the momentum going, bring in these conversations, bring your testimony. Like, I was struggling through this. I'm still struggling, but hey, together we're going to make it. But things are going to get better. Help is on the way.
I love that. Dr. Chandler?
I'll just piggyback on what everyone else said. Seek a therapist. It works. Use that creativeness and the work you do with your therapist to explore that creative and spiritual depths of yourself and your own self-awareness, and let a therapist help you normalize the process. Let him or her remind you that you're not alone, that it is okay to be sad, that it is okay to be scared. But we're going to help you process that in a healthy way. And we're going to be there with you every step of the way. As I tell my clients all the time, I'm just not your therapist when we meet. I'm your therapist in between sessions too. So reach out. You're not alone. The battle is not yours alone. Therapy works. And as I'll repeat, as I said before, our faith and religion are our weapons. Think of therapy as your strategic plan. And the work that we do renews our faith. And therapy and God can go together. Don't let anybody tell you that it can't.
Amen. You can have Jesus and you can have therapy.
Yes, you can.
So that what you said kind of made me want to, I forgot to go back. We might go like 5 minutes over because I forgot to go back to some things. Because Deja, I'm actually really curious. I want to hear from you. Why haven't you shared with your therapist kind of like the realities of SCD?
So I just seen a comment that says for those in the sickle cell community, the reason why we don't talk about it is because we're tired of it being the focus. And I can relate to that a little bit because I talk about it all the time. And especially now that I'm becoming more into the sickle cell community, it's like I don't want it to follow me everywhere. I have other issues that I want to talk about. Like sometimes I hate making everything about sickle cell because sickle cell is not just me. Like there's other things about me than just sickle cell. So I'd rather just talk about that than having to always talk about my sickle cell because I'm talking about it 24/7 when I'm living with it 24/7. Like it's me 24/7. So sometimes I just want to break, even though it's like I need to talk about the mental aspect about it. But it's like, okay, I'm kind of tired of talking about it. So that's why I'm not a huge fan, but I'm getting into it now because I know that it's been kind of building up with me and it really has been affecting me mentally lately these last couple months, especially with all the grief that's been going on in the community. So I really need to start talking about it.
So, Dr. Charles, the face and the leader of the Charisma Study, what is your response to Deasia and to other warriors who just feel, or caregivers who feel like they live with sickle cell, they're going to all these appointments, they just don't want to make their therapy session also about sickle cell? What would you say?
Well, I'm going to say something a little bit radical because I just listened to Deja and seen the comment. I don't think you have to talk about sickle cell to deal with your mental health, right? So it's not sickle cell specifically, it's the stress and the stuff you go through trying to manage sickle cell, right? You know, so yeah, so I don't think it's necessary to say, oh my goodness, my sickle cell this, my sickle cell that. But you know, you could say having a negative interaction with your provider, sometimes that doesn't have anything to do with sickle cell. You know, it's all the other stuff. So, yeah, so I think that if you don't want to talk about sickle cell and you want to talk about your other things going on in your life and you just want to use those tools to address your sickle cell or things sickle cell specific, yeah, do that. And I saw the comment, you know, does it have to be a red hot ladder? No, it doesn't have to be a red hot ladder per se. But, you know, but there's, if you think about, you know, we've been living so long dealing with stress the same way all the time.
Yeah.
And so to change that, it's going to take work and it's going to be uncomfortable. So it's not mean you have to relive trauma, but the way that you deal with things, your trauma, you deal with things a certain way, and we just do it. And we got to stop, think, change, and work to do that. So that's all I'm saying.
That makes sense.
I don't know if that answers your questions.
That worked for me. Was that good for you?
That was good for me.
Okay, that worked for me. So what about your message of hope, Dr. Charles?
Oh, my message of hope. Yeah, well, you know, like I said before, I think that, you know, it's your journey. You know, get all the help you possibly can. Even if you don't believe in a therapist, you know, don't call it a therapist, call it a coach. You know, I have a professional coach. They're a therapist, like, you know, real life, right? So, you know, you're on your journey, get all the help you can. You know, if, you know, a two-stranded rope is stronger, right? It's not easily broken. So we all need help. The other thing is that, you know, use all of this for your testimony. And sometimes, and it is true, thinking about ourselves, like, woe is me, that is going to make you feel more depressed. But thinking about how you can use your experience to help others, you know, that gives you, all of a sudden you're powerful. Your negative experience is power now. Like, that's empowered me to do something because I went through this. I'm going to make things better for somebody else. And then the last thing, like I was saying before, you know what, you know, help is on the way. I really truly believe that people, you know, the community has been doing it. Of course, you know, just the move of medicine and genetics, etc. But there's a lot of attention on sickle cell now, so we just got to capture this opportunity. Got to rise up, do it together. Yeah, man, help. Things are going to get better.
Phil and I love that Rise Up thing because we're all part of that Rise Up campaign. I love it. I love it. I caught it. Okay, well, I so appreciate the time that we have spent together on this roundtable. I know that it helped me. I know it was beneficial for the community, and I would just say that these are our pre-conference roundtables. So I'm just reminding everybody that April 18th through the 21st of 2024, SC-Red is having our first ever conference. And we will be bringing all of these faces there to have a very similar conversation to the one that we just had tonight. And I guess I'll end on a message of hope, similar to what Deasia and Dr. Charles said. I think that just the mere fact that you wake up in the morning means that you still have living to do, that you still have something to contribute to this world. And so at my darkest moments, rejecting the transplant, dealing with infertility, all of that, like Dr. Charles said, there would be no national, soon to be international organization without the darkest moment of my life. So that is a very powerful message that like there can be beauty in your darkest time. So I just want everybody to remember that and know that SC-Red, we are going to be providing some mental health resources to you. So make sure, this is like a shameless plug, but like subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on social media so that you can stay in touch and get those resources. But other than that, I think this was amazing. This was perfect. And we will see you later.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.